Today, we are fortunate to have Amy Scarr with us as a presenter. Amy has been a social worker for 30 years and has worked in a variety of settings that serve our older citizens. She's worked for Dane County Adult Protective Services for the last 18 years, managing Senior Victim Advocate Program since 2016. The Senior Victim Advocate works with Dane County residents 60 years and older who are victims of crime and abuse, and the program serves an average of 225 victims per year. This session will provide an understanding of the special needs of elder victims and how best to serve them at this critical time. In both Wisconsin and the U.S., senior populations are increasing in both number and complexity. This session will help you to understand the aging process and the complex nature of the elder maltreatment, victimization, and recovery. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Amy Scarr.
Thanks, Neil. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Triad. For the 15th time, my name is Amy Scarr, and I'm the Senior Victim Advocate for the Dane County Adult Protective Services Victim Advocate Program. We also have another advocate in that program who works with adult victims of crime who have intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities. But my specialized population are victims of crime who are Dane County residents over the age of 60. So I've got the control of my slides, so I'm hoping this will go well. Oh, well, not going as well as I'd hoped. Sorry about this, everybody. Let's see if that'll do it. Let's see. I am experiencing technical difficulties, which were working 5 minutes ago, so I apologize. But perhaps Neil could advance my slides too, if he's still there and listening. Maybe I can do that too. Hey, thanks, Neil. Appreciate it. So today's agenda, I want to talk a little bit about my program, and then we'll discuss who are victims and what crimes are committed against them and who's victimizing elders. I endeavor to provide trauma-informed care to senior victims, and we'll talk about what that means. And then I want us to talk about how you can help someone that you may be concerned about or you know has been victimized in our community. I'll share resources and take questions. If you have a question as we go along, like Neil said, enter it into the chat, but I will from time to time ask if there are any questions too. So I also want to, also on the agenda today may be my cats. So I have 2 cats and the door is closed, but the caterwaul, they don't like that. So the caterwauling may start at any moment. So I'll just apologize for that right away. My husband promised he would try to corral and control them, but if you're a cat owner, you know that's really not possible. So next slide. So the Dane County Senior Victim Advocacy and Advocate is funded by the Victim of Crime Act. And the Victim of Crime Act, also known as VOCA, was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan in 1984. And this act established something called the Crime Victims Fund. And that fund pays for people like myself, people like the Dane County District Attorney Victim Witness Unit, other agencies and entities that provide direct assistance to victims all across the United States. Millions of dollars are deposited annually into this fund, and those funds originate from criminal fines, penalties, forfeited bail bonds, or special assessments that are collected by the federal government. So taxpayers do not fund this program. The money comes from people or corporations that were convicted of federal crimes. The Dane County Senior Victim Advocacy program began in 2002 here in Dane County, and it's the only dedicated victim advocacy program for the victims over the age of 60 in the state of Wisconsin. And that being said, other victim advocacy agencies can provide care or direct care and service and assistance to senior victims, but I am dedicated to those victims here in Dane County. I get about 330 referrals per year. That number has been going up since 2002, and likely due to the fact that there are so many people aging into the senior category. I think Tracy Schrepfer said a couple of weeks ago that there are 10,000 baby boomers aging into the elder category, the senior category over the age of 65 every day in the United States. So that's likely why referrals just have been increasing over time. I work in collaboration with the Dane County Crime Victim Services and the Victim Witness Advocates, who are located at the Dane County District Attorney's Office. They serve victims and witnesses of all ages, and are currently carrying caseloads of about 800 cases per advocate. So because of caseload size and their necessary involvement with the criminal justice system, they often don't have time to spend with each senior victim that he or she may need, or really have knowledge of senior-specific services and resources. So I try to work in collaboration, but what I don't want to do is do their job as well. We each have a part in helping crime victims exercise their victim rights. Next slide. So here I've listed the most frequently committed crimes against seniors in Dane County. I keep statistics and demographics, and I report those to the state and federal Department of Justice every quarter. And so these are over the last 3 years, and they're in order of how many I get per year. But I wanted to define them for you today. So domestic violence or domestic abuse is a pattern of behavior in any relationship that's used to gain or obtain power and control over another person. Domestic abuse can happen to anyone of any race, age, sexual orientation, religion, or gender. And many programs in Wisconsin and in Dane County really define domestic violence as intimate partner violence or dating partner or romantic partner violence. But my program defines domestic as anyone who shares a domestic relationship or a domestic space with the senior. So this includes spouses or partners, intimate partners, family members like adult children, grandchildren, siblings, nephews and nieces, or chosen family members, as well as roommates or caregivers. So that domestic violence is approximately 50% of my referrals every year. And part of what makes up domestic violence are two crimes called domestic battery and domestic disorderly conduct. So battery is the unlawful or unwanted physical contact of a person by another person, or by a substance put in motion by another. So that's the official legal description of battery. So it is the physical act of touching another person's body, or using a projectile or some item that touches the person's body as well. So it may be a misdemeanor or felony, depending on the circumstances. Battery is different than assault. Okay, so assault is defined as an attempt or threat to injure another person, while battery is the actual harmful or offensive contact with the other person. Because assault is a threat of a harm and battery is the act of the harm on another person, these crimes are often charged together. Disorderly conduct. So in disorderly conduct in Wisconsin is one of the most often charged crimes. It encompasses a lot of behavior. Disorderly conduct is engaging in violent, indecent, profane, unreasonably loud, boisterous, or otherwise disorderly conduct under circumstances which the conduct tends to cause or provoke a disturbance. So that's a lot of words, right? But it's got a wide definition. It encompasses a lot of behaviors, and it typically law enforcement determines what is disorderly about what's going on when they have to respond to a situation. So domestic relationships are defined by law as, and it's very different than my definition, but domestic relationships are defined as a spouse or former spouse, an adult with whom the person resides or has resided with, and an adult with whom a person has a child in common. So I think of a case where a gentleman had picked up a woman, a friend of his, from a situation that she wanted to get out of. And he picked her up and was going to drive her back to where she was staying, and she became disorderly in the car. She became verbally abusive and made some threats while he was driving. And so he pulled over and asked her to get out. She did not, and he called for law enforcement to help get her out of the car and get her away from him. And law enforcement responded and asked the question, have you ever lived with this person? And they did. They had lived together 21 years ago. And so that is considered a domestic relationship. They had lived together. And so that was what she was charged with, was domestic disorderly conduct. That's not something we would typically think of, but that is the law, and that's what guides law enforcement's charging decisions. Adult physical assault. These are, and we've talked about assault, but I put that in there because that has been on the rise in the last year. And it is especially pertinent now during COVID-19 restrictions and the safer at home orders, and the people who are sheltering in place together that probably weren't before our safer at home executive orders. So that has been on the rise really in the last year. So it was on the rise even before COVID, but it is a real issue right now due to the safer at home and people who are residing or living together that may not normally do so. Financial crimes, we had a wonderful presentation, 2 wonderful presentations last week on financial crimes and scams and frauds by the BBB and AARP. So I don't have to cover those, thankfully. That's a whole other day, right? Financial crimes include identity theft, financial card or financial instrument crimes, which are like writing checks, right? Forgeries, and security infractions. And security infractions are when you pay for a service and the contract or the contractor for that service either doesn't provide it, takes your money and doesn't provide it, takes your money and doesn't provide what they said they would, or some of their services, but not all. Those are security infractions. Scams and frauds are also crimes, as some of you may know, but those are very hard to investigate. They're very difficult to prove and very difficult to prosecute. Like I said, I don't need to go into detail here because last week's was a wonderful presentation. Vehicular crimes, those have been on the rise really in the last 2 years, and I know we're getting a lot of information from news outlets about the thefts of cars in Dane County, but vehicular crimes are different than car thefts. They include operating while intoxicating or driving under the influence, hit and run an intended vehicle where the victim is there and the person fled the scene, hit and run with injury where the person fled and the victim was injured in some way, or operating a motor vehicle without the owner's consent. So it's not, the charge isn't that the person stole the vehicle, it's that they're driving the stolen vehicle. That's a vehicular crime. Like I said, over the last 2 years, Dane County has really been dealing with a wave of thefts and thefts from cars. So I just want to remind you all to lock your car doors, lock the doors that lead into your home if your car is in the garage or the driveway, and please do not keep anything of value in your car if you want to keep it. We've had purses and wallets stolen, tablets, phones stolen, people who keep their firearms in their cars. Those are being stolen from the car, the trunk. So please, please, please lock it up. If you at all value it, lock it up. And then lastly, theft. Theft occurs when somebody intentionally and knowingly takes something of yours, piece of property, without your consent, and its intent is to deprive it of you permanently. Property can include any personal effects, food and drink. I was working a case where there were 3 juveniles who stole. Somebody had a refrigerator in their garage. The garage door was open, and they stole beers and junk food out of the garage, and then went and partied about a mile away. But that is considered a theft, right? And you can steal money or financial instruments, cards, credit cards, all of that, or cars. So that's where car thefts are categorized as in theft. Any questions so far, Neil? That was a lot.
We have one question. What would you estimate are the percentages of the different types of cases that you deal with?
So when I started, when I started in 2016 with this program, the majority of my cases were financial crimes, financial exploitation. And I'm not surprised, right? That was just nationally, that is what is one of the most common crimes against seniors. They're targeted and they pay off. So I wasn't surprised. But over the last 4 years, domestic violence is now, like I said, 50% of my cases, with I would say then financial crimes, and that includes scams and frauds, but also financial exploitation by people who are known to the senior victim. Theft is a big one, and it's because crimes against seniors are often committed by people they know. Theft is used as a way to get something to sell because the perpetrator often has substance abuse issues and needs to sell things or pawn things in order to get cash to buy the drugs or alcohol that they need. So those are my top 3, I would say. I spend a lot of time on, but as everybody knows, any crime can be committed against anybody, including seniors. But those are my top 3. Does that answer the question, I hope?
Yes, thank you very much.
So who are our victims? Well, it could be any or all or some of these people. We cannot tell by looking or making assumptions. Sometimes people think that the older one is, the more vulnerable they are to victimization. But in Dane County, most of my senior victims that I work with are ages 60 to 69. Overall, So overall, here in Dane County, more women than men are victimized, and this was aligned with numbers in the last year. But it is equalizing. So ever since 2016, it's always been more women than men, but now they're coming even closer and closer. And so this is often because women live longer than men, so there typically are more women in senior years. But men now, of course, are enjoying good health care and proper health care and are living longer as well. So they're creeping up, but there are more women typically just around in this age group. So the majority of victims are white in Dane County. They're white. But I do work with everybody, every race, ethnicity, language, gender. So, like I said, crime happens to everybody, no matter what. And then most crimes originate in the home environment or around the home environment. Especially now, like I said, because people are sheltering in place due to safer at home orders. But I do want people to be aware, be cognizant that crime happens everywhere. Happens at stores and buses or public transportation, gas stations, over the phone and email. I know a number of you attended last week and talked about email scams and phone scams in the workplace and in the street. I'm working on a case where a woman had stopped for gas and left her purse, of course, on her passenger seat, had her wallet with her, had her card with her, and everything else was in the wallet and in her purse. And when she was getting gas, somebody reached through the window and stole her purse. And I think that's actually been happening a little more frequently. And I saw something on Channel 3000 about don't, lock your car. If you're going to get gas, lock your car. And I know people thinking, I shouldn't have to do that. It's kind of a sad state of affairs. But we all play our parts. And I'm not saying that you have a part in your victimization, but it's learning lessons and taking control and managing what you can to keep your things and your person safe. Next slide. Neil, next slide. Thank you. Okay. So who are these people who are committing crimes against seniors in our community? 70% of offenders are trusted others, okay? And trusted others include family members and people who have a trusting or caregiving relationship to the senior victim. Of those trusted others, many, okay, and especially now, but have always been, share some characteristics. So one is being resource dependent on the senior victim. And that can include financially dependent, emotionally dependent for housing or childcare. Many offenders are also struggling with substance abuse and mental health disorders. And that's true especially now, where they are using those things to cope. If they didn't have a problem with them before, they're using them to cope. And they're probably not getting the mental health treatment that they were getting prior to COVID, or they're not engaging in it, or they're not getting the supervision they need. So keep that in mind. It's sometimes, those family members or those people are trying, and it's just not available to them right now like it was. And unemployment or underemployed. I gotta hurry it up, don't I? It's already 10:30. Okay, so we'll get moving here. Next slide. So these are some special considerations when I'm working with senior survivors. Some sensory changes, just our physical slowing, cognition, and what I call the law and order effect. So we'll make our way through these quickly. So next slide. So sensory changes, obviously sensory is changes in vision, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. But many senior victims I work with often have deficits in hearing and vision. And they may require interventions or assistance that other systems aren't providing or don't provide, but that I can. So I can provide things in large print. I can read things out to people. I use voice amplification for people who are hard of hearing. And then I have written materials that have pictures along with the words so that we can work together and the victim can, in the way that they need to process what has happened to them. Next slide. So physical slowing. Okay, so on the left, some days we're feeling great. We're feeling just like these people, energetic and got all the energy in the world. We're working out. We've got, it's all our oyster. We have a lot of energy, and some days we feel like Homer Simpson here, which is, can't someone else just do it? Where we're low energy, and we have seniors have chronic illness and may have acute illness. So it really affects the physical slowing or the physical condition of a senior victim really affects, one, the victimization, but two, how they recover from that. It can also affect how they manage these relationships. So after victimization, and if you're not feeling physically well, or if you've been physically assaulted, it affects how they manage the relationship with the offender or with others in their life, how they can take care of their physical condition or their medical care, take care of their emotional or mental health, and then manage the effects of the abuse or the victimization, including how they engage with their victims' rights, with law enforcement, with the court process. So physical condition is a special consideration when working with the older population. Next slide. Often physical slowing and cognitive slowing are interconnected, and I'm not saying every senior has cognitive slowing, although research is starting to bear out. We kind of got something called cognitive vulnerability, but our brains are aging and they're slowing down, and they need things in older age that younger brains may not need. They need repetition. They need things written down, ways to learn things, not just one way, learn pictures, talking, something like that. So, they're often connected, right? Physical condition is connected to our mental condition. And probably of all age groups, seniors really understand this. They have some perspective on how they've lived their lives, and they understand that interconnectedness. So, many times a victim's cognition has slowed after the victimization, and they require a different approach, and they require information over time. And that is what my program can offer senior victims as well. I can work with a victim after victimization. I can, long after victimization, long after the court process is done. So as much time as people need to process and engage and recover from victimization, I can work with them. Slide 13. Okay, so this is what I call the law and order effect. And often when I meet with senior victims, we talk about this. We spend a good 20 minutes talking about the law and order effect. So their victimization can often be their first exposure to law enforcement, victim services, their rights, and any court process. But if that's not necessarily true, they could have been victimized many times before, but may never have engaged in their victim rights or engaged to a certain point. So we spent some time talking about this law and order frame of reference, which is not accurate for what they're about to see themselves in the court process. So I just let people know that if you're a victim of a crime and law enforcement has responded, you need to keep in mind that all the moving parts, once law enforcement has responded, all the moving parts have different priorities, right? So the victim's priority is to stop what is happening and regain personal control and safety. That is our goal, right? When we call law enforcement, is we want to stop what's going on and regain a sense of control. But when law enforcement responds, their goal is to secure your safety as a victim, as well as themselves, their safety, and anybody in or around the situation. So their perspective is wide, right? They have to attend to all persons' safety and the property, and the safety of property as well. They also have to commence an investigation to determine if a crime was committed, who committed it, who's the victim, and who, if anybody, should be arrested and a crime charged. So that is their goal, right? Very different than the victims, very different. And then once they have charged somebody or arrested, they send that report to the district attorney's office. And between law enforcement and the district attorney, they decide if that offender is going to be charged. And their priority after that is the management of the offender. Punishment, restoration, restitution, that's their charge, that's their aim, as well as a larger sense of justice for victims and our communities. So their priority is different than law enforcement, their priority is different than victims. What's wonderful about our system is that everybody really can and often do work together to address those three aims and assist victims in engaging victims' rights throughout the process. So, next slide. Okay, I'm sorry, I should ask, are there any questions?
None that have come in.
Great, okay, we're rocking and rolling. The hour passes so quickly. I'm going to apologize right now if there's something I'm not getting to, but I want to stay victim focused. So there may be slides that we can just, I trust you to read, but we'll get past. So there's just so much to tell you. So with senior victimization, these are the typical challenges for senior victims. So next slide. So fear with any victimization, fear is the valid and usually shared response for any victim. But with senior victims, most of them are afraid of another victimization or further abuse or retribution. And this causes, at some point, a victim will ask me, I want to drop the charges. I can't stand this. They're so mad at me. I want to drop the charges. And I will tell people that the reality is that you didn't press the charges, so you don't drop the charges, right? We just talked about law enforcement talks to the prosecution, and they decide what is charged and against whom. So it does take, once we talk about that a bit, it takes some of the burden off their shoulders. They can, if they have a relationship with the offender, they can say, this isn't my choice, and they can work on that relationship in that way. But it's also, I think it's also empowering for a victim to know that this is happening and there's going to be consequences for whatever behavior was. And it's not at the victim's directive, it's at the system level. So. Other fears are the loss of the relationship with the offender, if the offender is known to the senior victim, or sometimes the loss of relationships with other family members or trusted others who may be aligning with the offender. Most senior victims really just fear a loss of independence and leaving their home permanently. And while most crimes don't entail having to leave your home or don't entail an assault or an infraction so egregious that puts it at risk, for the ones that do feel like that is at risk, it's important to recognize and respect that fear, because it is often true. Our systems don't have a lot of options for people who require care and supervision other than facility-based placements. So And especially now, we were just talking about this in a meeting yesterday where, many families are extremely trepidatious to place anybody in a facility or a nursing facility because of COVID restrictions and not being able to visit and not having any oversight over their care, and just not being able to, provide any kind of in-person support to their senior. So this is a very difficult time, and of all the, there's so much to fear if you are a victim of a crime. Next slide. So, so this is a great picture of what it looks like, maybe a daughter or granddaughter going into somebody's purse, going into grandmother's purse. And as we know, and as I stated previous, 70% of crimes that are committed against seniors are committed by trusted others, who often have longstanding relationships and are often intimately involved with the senior's life. And so that victimization kind of has a ripple effect through all domains of the senior's life, right? Not just she stole my money here, but she, I feel betrayed that she stole from me. I'm vulnerable. This is not for her. I didn't tell her she could have that. Or having access to other family members, right? She may be the daughter of a daughter, and that's very difficult for senior victims to process. Is that people who are supposed to love them and care about them are committing crimes against them. Next slide, thanks. So at the time that a victim makes a report and there is an arrest is often the time where victims of especially domestics are at the most risk. It's also at this time where older crime victims, especially parents or grandparents, often care more about what happens to the offender that they as their family member, and less about what happens to themselves. And that shift, that thought shift really puts a victim at higher risk for any future victimization. What I often tell victims is that when we're working together, my aim is to be victim focused, safety focused, and offender accountable. So victim, safety, offender accountable. So and so we keep in mind, right in the forefront of our mind is how do you stay safe as the senior victim, and how do you hold the offender accountable, whatever that may mean. It may mean you just want an apology from the offender. You may want them, to pay you back. You may want them to admit in court that they did it, plead guilty. And so whatever accountability looks like to the victim is what we try to focus on. Next slide. And limited resources. So when seniors are victimized, especially with financial crimes, exploitation, they do not have the resources to bounce back from that victimization. They're often no longer working, or maybe working part-time, and they cannot replace what was taken from them in any way, or they now have other bills to pay as a result of the victimization. You may need to pay your insurance deductible if something happened to your property. You may have to take out a loan to cover the cost of the crime, or you may need, if your car was stolen, you will need to engage with your insurance company, if you had insurance, to see what they will value your car at. And if you need to buy another one, you may not be able to afford what the gap, or if you owed money on the car, you may not be able to afford a new car. So seniors just don't have as many financial resources to bounce back from a victimization that they would have at, say, age 30 or 40. But bounce back also means in terms of physical or medical condition as well, or emotional health, or time and energy. So I had a recent case where a woman had her car stolen and her purse was in it, and so she's going through a lot of loss, and we're trying to figure out, kind of how to make everything whole again, getting new credit cards, all of that. And actually one of her biggest struggles right now is that her keys were stolen and her mailbox key was on her key ring. And she is struggling with her condo association and the US Postal Service, who will replace the key. And they're both fighting against each other. And so she is now having to go down to the post office to get her mail every day, because neither entity will say they will pay for her new mailbox key. So that's a struggle she didn't even imagine that she would have. So the bounce back, right, and the limited resources come from a host of different circumstances. Next slide. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but most senior victims do not, they want justice and they want help for the offender. And that includes offenders they do not know. I meet with a lot of senior victims who really want the offender to understand what happened to them, what they did to them, what's happened to them, and apologize for it, right? They want them to understand and apologize. And they don't want to hear any excuses. They just want that kind of that direct communication of understanding what happened and apologizing. However, that's not how our system works, right? Crimes are committed and offenders are arrested and jailed, and then they have a hearing, and then it's often before the victim has any time to even rest or reorient to what they want to have happen in their case. Dane County does have a restorative court program, but even now, it cannot manage all of the cases that are appropriate for that court, or that a victim would ask for to go to that court. It can't manage everything now the way it is. So it certainly couldn't manage anytime a senior victim who the offender may be known to would ask for a restorative court. And that's unfortunate. So next slide. So how I help people. So I operate from a trauma-informed framework, and I understand the principles of trauma-informed care, and I hope I am offering services within that framework. I understand the responses of a victim during victimization, and if we could just go forward there. If we could forward the slide. Okay, well, sorry. So this is the definition of trauma, and many of you have seen that. So I think we can go forward here. And then these are the SAMHSA's 6 principles of trauma-informed care: safety, trustworthiness, peer support, collaboration, empowerment. And I was going to go through those today, but our time is getting short. So I trust that you can all see that, and then I have included that in my resource page, so that if you want to, you can look that up. So here is victim response. It's all in your head, right? So when understanding how our brains work and respond to a threat is really important to understanding why a victim reacts the way they do or doesn't react. And these responses, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, are automatic, right? There's nothing we do to start them. There's nothing we do to stop them. They are there to protect us, and they are here to stay. Okay, evolution or repetitive behavior has made these responses what happens when our bodies and our minds are under threat. It says the 4 options there, but I just wanted, this takeaway is that these aren't options, right? We don't choose them. We don't have any control over them. But what probably is happening, what research is showing, is that they are the 4 instincts, and freeze is always the first instinct. Our brain freezes momentarily, temporarily for a lot of us, but sometimes completely, right? And we can't act on their behalf. But freeze is usually what starts this kind of cascade of responses. So freeze, and then you can flight or fight it. And then fawn, there's more in research coming out about fawn, and that is essentially our brain's response to immediately moving to appease or please the offender to avoid further threat or avoid further victimization. So that is interesting. And I draw attention to fawn because fawn is developed over time. So if a senior victim has a longstanding relationship with the offender, this may have been a coping mechanism and developed over time. And so this may be the response after freeze. And so it's important to know that, because what we see as fawn, others will see as knowingly or competent, knowingly engage with the offender, not say no, not do anything on their behalf to mitigate the threat. And what it really is, though, is this response, this automatic response by the victim who has had this repetitive response to the offender over time. Next slide. And then I know a lot of you, most of you now have heard about the adverse childhood experiences research study that was done in between 1995 and 1997 by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And I've also included that in our list of resources. So, but what's germane here is that in the last, I would say 10 years, researchers have been looking at ACE scores and have been trying to find out and research how they may be connected to us in later life. So as we age, what effects do the ACEs have on us as we age, so our older lives, but also they're starting to reveal ACE scores and the connection they have to a triggering effect when somebody who is older is victimized again. So there's a lot of research happening out there as to how ACEs reveal connections for older people's physical and psychological conditions. Next slide. We're going to get there. So, and then it's really important for me when I work with victims is to understand coping strategies. And I think this could be all of us at some point here in the last 7 months, or maybe before. But it's really important to know what I'm seeing and how people are coping. Most people know what it takes to make themselves feel better. And ideally, it would be healthy coping strategies, like just eating and drinking well, and enough, resting as much as you need to, and then sharing what has happened to you with people who you know are supportive. But it's also, it's important to my work that I understand the unhealthy coping, like denial or the use of alcohol and drugs to avoid the physical or the psychological pain. So that's in my work. It's really important that I know how a victim is coping with what's happened to them. Next slide. And then just reminding senior victims that most people, in fact, all people, have resilience to overcome, and they can recover. It's a message of hope that I try to share with every victim in small and big ways. It's really important that they have positive messages at this time, because they are experiencing and re-experiencing what has happened to them. And if the positive message gets through even one time, it really helps the victim in their recovery. Most of the time, recovery takes help, emotional support, and time. I will work with victims over a course of a year, and I try to remember and share where we started and where they ended, because time has often healed a lot, and the work they did in that time really helped them and the situation. So try to remember that. Next slide. Okay, so how can you help? How can you help senior victims? So it should be the easiest, right? But when somebody tells you what's happened to them, believe them. Believe them when they have told you what happened. And remember that your job for this person that you care about is listening and not investigating, right? It's not our jobs to get all the information we can from them and start questioning and investigating what you think happened. Think about what you would like when you want to tell somebody something really hard, right? You want to be listened to without interruption. You want to be shown they care about you, and you want time to kind of let it all out. And what don't you want, right? You don't want to be told what to do or how to fix things, for sure. You want time to be able to express yourself fully. So this is really important, but it's also really hard for a lot of people who want to help people they care about, because what we usually feel is it's our job to fix something, right? It's our job to tell them where they can find the answers. A lot of us see it as a lot of us are experiencing uncomfortable feelings. And so taking action, not sitting with feelings, but taking action is where we feel most comfortable. So support the individual's choices. And this can be really, really hard, especially if you are a family member or close and your happiness is invested in somebody else's happiness. But the individual they alone must live with the consequences of what happened. And so this often means they choose to continue a relationship with an offender, or especially continuing to have a relationship with the offender, whatever that may be. That's very hard. But so I support individual choices, try to not be judgmental, but do so in all honesty. So focus on safety, of course, and safety planning. Respect confidentiality and privacy, of course, right? This is not, what they share with us is not dinner table fodder. It's not to be discussed or rumored in any way or make assumptions. Know who to contact. So if you don't know who to contact, you may contact me. I'd be happy to help somebody, be happy to talk with you about who you're concerned about, as well as connect you with appropriate services with regards to the context of the crime. And then lastly, know your limits. Okay, so I think Officer Jennison was talking about this a couple weeks ago. About somebody asked, how do you know when you're fried, essentially, and and the MPD gets a lot of support for their own vicarious trauma or their own secondary trauma, and they get a lot of training to recognize it themselves. So when you have somebody you love or care about and are working with, and they're telling you some pretty awful things or bringing up a lot of feelings that are negative, but that they need to work through. Know your limits. We're empathetic and compassionate by nature, but we have our own experiences with traumatic events that may be triggering, that conversation may be triggering. And know if you are sensitive to any topic. I myself have a lot of trouble hearing about animal cruelty. So happens, and I have trouble hearing about human cruelty, but animal cruelty. And so if this comes up in discussions, I just have to claim it honestly and tell the person that while I still care about what's happened, I may not be able to hear certain details. I can hear an overall or sense of what's happened, but I can't have details. And I find that honest communication and knowing my own limits is what builds trust and rapport with somebody. So do we have time for the next one? Next slide.
Amy, we're
okay.
Right at 2 minutes to the hour. So if we can do a wrap up,
yep.
Please.
So my last slide is victim support in COVID-19. So all of these things, COVID-19 has made things much more stressful, much more difficult in victimization, and it's also an underlying and chronic stressor. So for anybody who has been victimized, this is simmering underneath all of that, right? It's on their plate as well. So I just thank everybody. I love this picture. It's a great image of both kind of inner and outer worlds, and that we're never without barriers or challenges, but with time and attention and support, things do become clearer and brighter. So I just love that picture. Here are my resources. So hopefully those are helpful to you. And thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Excellent, Amy. Very, very good presentation. And we very much appreciate all the work you do to help our seniors. We recognize that the court process can drag on for a long time, and it's wonderful to know that you're there to help, and we very much appreciate it. It's very in keeping with our conference theme of Vision 2020 towards a safer and healthier decade. And we very much appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome.